Alright. So we are getting into the macroeconomy, talking about things that describe everything within the economy. So I said there were 3 goals that we were always trying to reach in the macroeconomy. What are our 3 goals?
Growth.
Okay, growth in the economy, that's our first one. Full employment, right? And stable prices. Okay. I will try very hard for the first few weeks to always start class with what are those 3, because that's really the crux of everything that we talk about for the rest of this semester. We should always be going back to one of these 3. Please remember that these 2 guys go together. If one of these is going up, essentially so is the other one. It may not be right away, but it's going to happen eventually. Likewise, if one of these is going down, the other one will probably be following suit. Alright? And that, in general, stable prices are a problem when these things are good, not a problem when these things are bad.
Doesn't growth in the economy usually, it happens before the other? No,
Usually.
It's like the trigger.
Yep,
Yeah.
tends to be. Employment tends to follow behind economy changes.
Right.
Generally. And we'll look at some of that in a little bit. Now, Chapter 11 is talking about this one, growth in the economy. So the first thing we have to do before we can talk about growth in the economy is, how do we measure it? In order for something to be growing, we have to know how to measure it. Our measurement is gross domestic product. What is gross domestic product?
Things that are made here.
Yeah. It is the production of goods and services. Please note that it's both of those in a country's borders over a time period. Again, it doesn't matter what the time period can be variant to some degree. But again, realize that this is production, not sales. Okay? The reason that sales come into a play when we talk about gross domestic product is that we have to measure this number, and therefore we need a value, right? So value is what's driven by sales, but the actual effect of GDP is based on when it was made, not when it was sold. All right. So that's sort of the broad definition of GDP. And what we were talking about at the end of last class are the things that are not GDP. So things that you might think are GDP or generating GDP for our country or for our economy, that isn't. What's the number one nasty one?
Anything used.
Exactly. Used goods. Used goods does not affect GDP. And again, if you're trying to make this country, look strong, you want GDP to be growing, every penny you spend on used goods is a deterrent to that. It's bad. You really shouldn't be doing it, right? Always buy new. When the government spends money, folks, they always spend money on new goods. Always. Because the government's never going to waste money on something that's not adding to GDP, because that's what we use to measure whether this country is growing or is good, right?
They have a never-ending supply of money.
Mostly, yes. Now, what other things did we get to on Monday that told us we're not GDP?
Non-productive financial transactions.
Quote-unquote non-productive financial transactions. That's the book definition of it. And what are these sorts of things? What are examples of these?
Retirement.
Yeah.
Disability.
Unemployment.
Compensation.
Right, so all of the payments that we get where we're doing nothing, right? And remember that if it's from the government, it's called a transfer payment. Intermediate goods. What is an intermediate good?
Like something that you need to produce your final product. Like for instance, the windshield in a car.
Yeah.
The
This is-
manufacturer's gonna buy it, but they're gonna use it as part of the finished product.
Exactly. These ones are a little on the tricky side, but intermediate goods are actually not a part of GDP. So if you are a windshield producing company, right, so you're a glass company and some of the things that you produce are windshields, when you produce that windshield, if you sell it to GM or Ford or Chrysler so that they can use it and put it into a new car, that's an intermediate good and does not count towards GDP. If you are a glass company and you also have a front to your shop that you sell windshields for, and someone comes in and says, I need to buy a new windshield because I just shattered mine because there was salt popping up out of the salt truck and it smacked your front windshield and it finally made it crack so big that it was going to break. When you buy that windshield from that company,
It is a GDP.
it is GDP.
And what about if they sell it to someone who is going to only sell that to? Like you don't go to the glass manufacturer to get it, you go to
A resale shop.
resale shop.
Right.
Now, that's going to be a GDP, right?
It's going to be GDP, but then again, it kind of depends on the value of the GDP that's going to be generated by that windshield. So here's where it gets tricky, right? So when the shop bought the windshield from the manufacturer, they paid say
Wholesale.
$100 for it.
Wholesale
right?
cost.
Right. When they resale it at say $150 or $200, are they selling you something that's new?
Yes, essentially, but
Nah, they didn't make it, right? The retail shop did not make the good. So where does that value-added money come from or go towards the economy?
Taxes, right? Well, they would pay taxes on the money they made on it.
They have to pay the taxes on the income, but really it's based off of the production. So that resale shop that's selling you your windshield at a retail price, did they generate any GDP?
Yeah.
no.
No.
I mean, they didn't make anything, did they?
Well,
So
then,
what about the
then
employees
the
that get paid for working
manufacturer.
there?
The
generates-
employees are generating GDP, yes. But the actual sale of the windshield at the retail shop,
Right.
no. Any retail business. Because they didn't make it. All they're doing is adding to inflation. Does inflation help this country? I mean, do you guys like inflation? No. So another thing that you should never do is buy from a retail shop. You should always go directly to the manufacturer.
Are
Right.
these rules you're making for me?
Well, these are just the sorts of things you should do to be a good American, right?
Okay.
Again, though, it's that level of GDP. Again, this is one of those things that everybody is so hell-bent on looking at GDP, right, as to whether our country is growing. Well, what's the GDP of that windshield? Is it $100 where that's what the retail shop bought it from the wholesale shop? Or is it the $200 that you paid to get it from the retail shop?
Should be the 100.
Well, then you can't count like corn. Because what are they doing with the corn? They're selling it to somebody who's going to make cereal or dog food or whatever.
Right, well, but when they buy the corn is GDP. When they transfer the corn into cereal or anything else,
Whatever.
then it's something new. Now it's been processed into something new.
So it counts as GDP.
But if you're buying fresh corn, it doesn't.
Right, exactly. So where is the line? How do we know where the line is? How does the windshield company know, or the government know, how much of the windshield business went to, resale shops, and how much of it went to car shops that are going to use that windshield to put into a final car?
Yeah, enlighten us.
Well, how many of you have been a contractor before?
Well, I built signs for a living.
Okay. So if you were a contractor, when you went to, say, Menards or Home Depot to buy stuff, and you were buying it as a contractor instead of as a homeowner,
Had a tax exempt card.
you had a tax-exempt card. That's the government's way of tracking you buying something as an intermediate good, as opposed to me going to Menards and buying something as a final good.
Yeah, because when I sold the sign, I charged a sales tax.
Exactly. So there's where the government tries to make its difference. When you're paying standard tax for something, that's where they're going to add the actual value to GDP. So as it turns out, that windshield, which we thought was worth $100, It's actually the $200 that we sold it at that's gonna hit GDP. The $100, which the resale shop paid for it, they're gonna pay it as a reseller, they're not gonna pay standard tax rates for it until they get to
That's
the...
an inflated.
Why would we do
cost.
that? Why would we do that?
Higher GDP.
Higher GDP. What does higher GDP say? Yay, America! Go US! Woohoo!
Quick
Woohoo!
here, we're gonna have more jobs.
That's right. Everybody's going to be happy again because GDP is going up. Because that's all we care about, right? We only read headlines. We read headlines that say we're in a recovery or we're in a recession. And what drives it is purely what's happening to this number. And when you're in a recession, what happens to your election capabilities?
Goes down.
Spend a lot more money trying to get that.
That's absolutely right? Okay, so this GDP stuff, it is a pain in the butt to keep track of. And what are the rules? When are the rules changing, right? I mean, half of the rules that govern GDP, I can guarantee you, I don't know, right? I can go do research on it and say, well, which one is it? And it'll change from year to year. Why? Well, because they don't really want me to know, because I'm guessing they probably make the number up half the time. I don't know. I would love to tell you that I have all the answers. Sorry, guys, I don't. Tell you what I do know, but it's not everything. Now, what other sorts of things are not here in GDP? Right?
Unreported income. Unreported income.
Yeah, let's just call it illegal activity. Where illegal could mean lots of different things, right? I mean, if you go to Vegas and you win $2,000 or $3,000 sitting at the crap table or at the poker table, do you report that as income and pay tax on it?
Not if you're smart.
No,
Not unless it's your
they'll
job.
let you walk away with that much, but it
Yeah, at
gets
some
to a
point-
certain point, they'll come
some
over
point-
to you and say, look here, you
Here's
have
a form.
to fill out this form
That's
for
right.
us.
They will do it, and that's because it's legal in some places, but not in
The
others.
reason they do that is because they get to claim their losses too.
Oh, yes. It's all good, folks.
Not that
Everybody's
they
gotta
lose
keep
very
track of
much.
it. And it all
Very
comes
often.
down to whether or not it's going to be helpful for somebody's bottom line, right? And so if a casino's giving away money, they want to be able to report it as a loss because that's a loss to a casino. When you pay them, it's a bonus, right? They also try to hide that, but. All right, so illegal activity is up inside of there. Now, here's one tricky one. And this is one I like to point out because it's just weird. Interest income. So imagine, if you will, you invest money in, say, IBM, right? So IBM is saying that we need to build a new plant in, say, Janesville, right? They bought a bunch of land that was sitting there with a big, huge factory on it that no one was using. IBM came and said, oh, that big, huge factory that used to make cars, we're going to buy it and turn it into a computer creating company. Right? Could happen. I mean, it won't, but it might, right? So when they do this, IBM will put out a note saying, we need to borrow like $2 or $3 million. And so what they'll do is they'll sell bonds saying, Janet, you can buy a $500 bond and we'll pay you 8% interest on that bond in, say, 2 years. So they would pay you $40 to lend them $500. That $40 of interest that you earn, did you work for it? Technically no, right? Is it going to be added to GDP?
No.
You would say no. But it is. From a private investment, it is GDP.
What about dividends?
Dividends on stock?
Yeah, because it's
No, look,
you didn't
stock is-
you didn't work for that.
Stock is different. We'll get to stock in a second. We're just talking about bonds right now, where you're earning interest, like investing in your bank, right? If you put $1,000 in your bank, they'll pay you 0.2% interest. You may earn $2 on your $1,000 in the bank. That money that you earn in interest, since it's coming from a private bank, is GDP. Because what you've done is allowed them to make your money work. Right? When you give $500 to IBM so that they can build their plant, that $500 is allowing them to build GDP. Therefore, that money that you earn from it should be GDP-driven money. Just like commissions on a sale are GDP. At least that's the logic behind it, right? Is that investing money in a company so that they can build is GDP. Now, when you buy stock in a company and you sell it for a profit, that is actually not GDP. The reason why is that stock is ownership. When you buy stock in a company, you're buying a piece of the company. You own a piece of it now. Just because it changed hands from one owner to another, that's a used good. Buying and selling stock is like buying and selling used goods. And if you can find a car in Mexico that's worth $100 in Mexico but $5,000 here in the US, you're making money out of the deal, folks, but you're not generating any GDP.
So would government bonds count then?
Government bonds, on the other hand,
Oh, this gets count.
yeah, it does. This is why it's a pain in the ass to figure it out and keep track of it. From the government, when you loan money to the government, so suppose you buy a U.S. savings bond, right? You know, like
Right, you earn interest.
you earn interest on the U.S. savings bond, but when you give money to the government, does the government work from your money? Are they producing anything more because you gave them money? According to the government, no. Which is absolutely hilarious.
What's the truth?
So when you invest in the U.S. government in a savings bond, the interest you earn is actually considered a transfer payment, like Social Security or disability or unemployment. Whereas if you invest money into a company and that company pays you interest on your investment, that is because the actual company will do real work where the government, in theory, won't.
What about like payday loans or title loans?
Loans from a specific industry, the interest that they earn, because you have to pay interest on the money that they lend you, yeah, that's GDP.
Yeah, their loan is their
Yeah,
product.
because it's their profit. Yeah, it's a service they're providing you.
I'm not saying their loan is the product.
Yeah, it's the service that they're providing you. It's the ability to have money that you can, in theory, do something with. It's the same as anything else, right? Like the service that I'm providing you guys by being a teacher. Technically, I'm generating GDP for every minute I'm up here yapping my gums at you guys, right? It's productive in some fashion.
Or at least we can say it is.
All right, so again, remember what is GDP, right? So when you sell a used good, the good itself is not generating GDP, but if you're getting paid to generate that sale, it is GDP, right? So all those realtors who are selling you a used house, the sale of the used house is not GDP, but the commission they get paid, 2.5% to 3.5% of the sale of the house, that is.
Well, then it's okay to buy used stuff.
Yeah,
as
as long as
commission for it.
somebody's getting a commission for it, it's okay to buy used
All
stuff.
right, all right.
Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples. You tell me whether it is or is not GDP. All right. So I bought stock in Apple back in the 90s at like $4 or $5 a share. So I bought like 600 or 700 shares. I sold them a little bit ago at $600 or $700 per share and wound up making $2 million in the deal. Did I generate GDP from that sale of stock?
No.
No.
No. Why?
Stock.
Why is stock bad again?
Used good.
It's a used good, right? Stocks and bonds, stocks and bonds, when you sell them, if you make more money off of selling them,
Now, you're
Doesn't
going to
matter.
pay a commission to the broker who made that sale for you, which is cheap.
That's right.
All right.
But I didn't tell you anything about the broker because maybe I am a broker
I was just,
and I did the sale myself.
I was trying to show you I learned something.
Good man, good man. All right, so let's see. I cooked dinner for my family.
Yes.
Just
Yeah.
tricky.
Well,
You bought it from the store.
as long as
Did I say I bought it from the store? What if I grew it in my garden?
Yeah.
So,
as long as it's
so you bought the seeds.
Does it say I bought the seeds? Maybe I reproduced them magically.
you had to
Maybe
buy
it
the
was from
electricity.
Montana.
Don't read anything into this other than what I did. All I did was
No.
cook dinner.
No.
No, I didn't get paid for cooking dinner.
No.
Nothing, right?
You got,
Okay.
you got
So,
a bunch of smiling faces.
yes, I got happy family, but it
But
doesn't
very
mean.
sick.
Yeah, depending how bad of a cook I am. All right, so let's see.
No. So
Why not?
It's easy.
good.
Okay. Not on this one either. Dang it, one of these days.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Why?
Because bonds
It's from
from
a
private
private
companies. count.
Yes. Okay. When you're collecting interest, you have to go and see where the interest comes from. If it comes from the government, no. If it comes from a company, yes. All right. Let's see. Jan gets $4,000 for selling a house.
It's a cheap house.
Yes.
Is she a realtor?
She's
She's a realtor.
Then yes.
right.
Good question. If you sold the house for $4,000, if you sold the house for $4,000, would that be GDP? No, but if you get $4,000 because you sold a house,
And then yes, it's commercial.
yes, right.
Yeah, you could have been the owner and made a profit on your equity.
True, you sold a house
No,
for
that-
$4,000.
Well, I'm just saying,
Right.
you might have.
Right, something along those lines. Okay, so sometimes there has to be a little bit of clarity thrown
Hopefully
into
it'll
it.
be a lot more
Yeah.
than 4,000.
Let's see. My nail company sells a crate of nails to a contractor.
No.
Why not?
Because
it's
it's
technically a used good.
intermediate good.
Intermediate good, right, exactly. So if you own a nail company, you actually have to keep track of who you're selling your stuff to. If you're selling it to someone who's going to reuse it to finish a good, it's not. If you sold it to me, Joe Schmo off the street, and I'm going to go hang, paintings in my
And
house.
the contractor keeps track of it too and reports it, so you better keep track of it because
If they don't match up,
somebody's gonna
somebody's
be
going to find it.
somebody's gonna be sniffing around a little bit.
Alright, so this is definitely a type of quiz type question, me asking you is or is not something GDP. Be ready.
We won't have to interject our own information into that, like the realtor or whatever,
Never hurts, right?
maybe.
Okay, so how does all of this GDP stuff work in the economy, right? I mean, one of the things that we have to try and figure out, or think about, right, is some of these things that we're making are generating money for us, whereas other things that we're doing are not necessarily, right? So think about it, right? If you get a job and you go to a factory and you're producing, say, cars, right? So you get a job at GM. While you're out there at work producing cars, the car is a part of GDP, but your income is also a part of GDP too, right? So while you're making the car, are you kind of double producing for the country at that time? Because you're working, so you're getting paid, and that's a service you're providing to GM. You're also producing cars, and those cars are also GDP.
Yeah, but that's for the company, not
And the
you.
company.
So
True.
you're not really doubling.
But is my work sort of double counting because I'm getting paid for it, and GM is going to get paid for the work, the stuff that I'm making?
No.
Because they would be able to make it anyways.
They would be able to make it anyways?
Most likely.
Well, they categorize that as a durable good and a non-durable good.
Something
No,
along
something
those lines,
like
but
that.
so one of the things that economists try and do then is describe how does this GDP get generated? How do we follow it, right? How do we track it? Because obviously there's some things that count and some things that don't. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So how do they add up all these numbers? Where do they find it?
No,
Right.
in a graph.
Of course, there has to be a picture. Words are nice, but pictures are so much better. All right? So what we do is we work with the circular flow model. The circular flow model is a way to sort of track how business is generating goods and how people are generating goods and how it all sort of fits together. All right? So it's a circular flow model, but we're gonna work with the four corners of the circle. Bear with me a second. One of the pinpoints or one of the edges of our circle will be the households, which is where we all exist, people. And the other side of that are then the businesses that hire us or that we work for, depending on how you look at it. And that's the other side of one half of the circle. Now, how do households get stuff from the business?
You don't have to make purchases.
Yeah, they make purchases. And where they make purchases, Walmart, Target, gas station, what have you,
Home Depot.
exactly, product market, right? Where we go to buy the products. And the other half of that is where we go to make the products. And it's a little bit of a weird name, but bear with me to some degree. It's the factor market. This is where we go to get a job, basically. Where we offer our services to businesses saying, you need us to make stuff, so you're going to pay us to do it. And
No wonder it's a circle.
it is, right? Because it is a circle if you think about it, right? Because the households, what do the households take up to the product market in order to buy goods?
Their incomes.
They take their money, right? And when we spend that money at Walmart or Target or Home Depot, where does the money go? It flows over into the business. And what does the business do with the money?
They pay the workers.
People.
It goes down to the factor market and says, hey, you guys, we want to hire you. And when they hire you and you work for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or however it goes,
You bring the money home
You
to
get
your
You
household.
get a paycheck.
you get a paycheck and the circle continues.
The circle of life.
And this is the circular flow of money in the system, right? So money flows from the households to the product market, from the product market to the businesses, from the businesses back to the factor market, and then back into the households. And this is why we consider the business world to really just be a circle of life, right? So we all start singing some Disney song, and
Yep.
which one is that one? Is that the Lion one?
Got Lion
Yeah.
King.
Is it Lion King? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the Frozen one or the circus
Oh
one or
my goodness.
you name it. Now, this is one way to go around the circle. Is it the only way to go around the circle?
No.
Yeah.
No, we could go the other direction. The question is, what flows the other way? Well, when you go up to the product market with your money, what do you come back with?
Product.
The product. So there's a flow going the other way, except it's not money that's flowing back to your household, it's
Supply and demand.
goods and services. We'll get to there. That's chapter 14.
Well, they have it right here in their system.
And in order for the product market to sell those goods and services, who has to give them the goods and services?
The business.
The business. And likewise, in order for the businesses to have people to work, we have to take all of our services or goods and services to the businesses when we get hired. And when we get hired, we go out and fill out an application and say, hey, look, I have the ability to create goods and services. So the opposite flow of the circular flow model is following the items as opposed to following the money. So there's two ways that the government measures GDP. It measures it this way by counting up all of the actual goods and services that are created, and it counts it up this way, which is the sum of all of the money that all those things generate. And then we say, are those things pretty close? Yes. Okay, that's what our GDP is. So GDP, when you're working in that company, you're getting paid a certain amount of money, and that company is going to get a product that it is then going to sell. The product is flowing this way. The money that you're getting paid is flowing the other way, and actually, they're counted separately. Right? Money and goods and services, the government actually considers separate pieces of the GDP calculation. Alright? Alright, so that's the circular flow. Please remember the difference about how things, which ones go clockwise and which ones go counterclockwise. Now, because of this circular flow model, what we do is we generate a nice formula. It's a really, really, really scary formula, so get ready for it. It's not that scary, but but when households go to the product market and buy goods and services, this is considered consumption, or it's consumer spending. So one piece of the GDP puzzle is C, consumer spending. This money flows from the product market over to the businesses, and the businesses, if they don't necessarily want to spend their money on people, what else do businesses do with their money besides hide it in the Cayman Islands?
Invest it.
They invest it, right? So the other place that money goes to is investment, like building a new factory or buying more raw materials or, what have you about upgrading their business. So the second piece of the GDP calculation is I. And that's business investment. And those are really the two biggest pieces, well, in theory, the two biggest pieces of our GDP circle, right? That completes the circle. Households take their money and spend it. It runs to the businesses. Businesses invest it back into the circle or back into the economy. Now, the question we have is, who else puts money into that circle?
Government consumption.
The government also does, and the government is not anywhere in here yet, right? But the government's definitely spending money. And in general, I do this, most other books do not. I put the government in the middle. Not because it's the most important, or not because it's a central government or anything nice like that. The reason I put it here is that the government's got its hands in everything, folks. The government goes to the product market and buys goods and services. The government also gives money to businesses. The government also gives money to people. The government also hires people. The government's got its hands in everywhere. The idea, though, is that it's trying to add to the circle. Now, where else can money come from into our economy? Again, our being the U.S. economy. Hint, hint, hint.
International.
International economy, right? Some of our businesses will produce goods and services, and instead of selling them in our product market, we may export them. When we export a good, what does the country that's getting the good have to do?
Import it.
Pay for it. So there are times when there's an arrow out here from the world, and this represents exports because there's money coming into our economy from the exports, right? We like exports. And unfortunately we can't use an E because E is used for something else. What's E used for? Elasticity, yes, chapter 5. What is elasticity again?
The flattened out demand line.
Ooh, yeah, it's something about demand lines. Very good. What's elasticity again? Never hurts to review.
It's like a rubber band, it stretches both ways.
True.
Um,
What's it
The
measuring?
difference of,
what's it measuring?
Yeah. What's its measurement of?
Quantity.
Quantity is a piece of it.
in demand.
And what's the other
Price,
piece of it?
price.
Price. It's how responsive our demand is to a price change, right? Remember, change in percent of quantity divided by the change in percent of price.
Oh,
I know how to
you
do it, I
just
say the-
technicalized it.
So exports are the good thing. What else?
Imports are the bad thing.
Imports are the bad thing, right? Because some of our households take our money and we go out into the world and buy goods from other countries instead of from our own country.
So
And-
that
They're coming.
subtracts from the GDP.
Yes, right? Imports take away from our economy, so we actually subtract the amount of goods that we import into the world, into our country. And since we're already using I for business investment, use M for imports. So X is exports, M is imports. Generally, you will see them put into a parenthesis because
Gotta do subtraction first.
yeah, it's the quote-unquote net exports, right? So when you go and look up online what the government is doing to calculate GDP, they will generally give you 4 categories that represent GDP. They will give you consumer spending, business investment, government spending, and net exports. They're almost always 4 columns, and you can see them adding up, give you an actual value for what our GDP is on any given year or month or what have you. All right? Guess which one of these is the biggest percent of our GDP?
The government.
Nope.
Nope.
Consumer spending.
Consumer spending. We, folks, drive the economy. Generally speaking, consumer spending is between 60 and 70% of our total GDP.
What happens when we don't spend more?
What do you think happens? So
Let's go into a recession.
we go into a recession. That's absolutely right. Right? This circular flow is how the economy keeps itself healthy, right? As long as every piece in the circle is working well, we're all good. Every one of those arrows has to be working smoothly for the economy to be growing. Have a hitch in any one of those arrows, there's a problem in your economy. For us, back in 2009, this arrow fell flat. Why?
Everybody lost their job.
Everybody lost their job.
Lost their
Everybody lost their investment.
half their
So they cut back
investment.
on spending.
Exactly. So when your house used to be worth $200,000, and now all of a sudden it's worth $100,000.
You can't borrow any money.
You can't borrow any money, and you just lost $100,000. You're not going to spend any money either.
That's right.
So what happened was people cut back, right? They cut their spending. When we cut our spending, what happens to businesses?
They don't make as much.
They don't make as much money. When businesses don't make as much money, what do?
Not hire as many people.
They not hire as many people, right? So now all of a sudden people are losing their jobs as well as having their house lose its value.
Which in turn makes people spend less.
Which makes people spend less, which makes businesses
Spend
Make
or
less.
make less.
make less, so they
Raise
Higher.
prices.
hire less. They don't raise prices. Businesses have not raised prices. Prices have hardly gone up
They
at
are
all.
now.
No, they're just starting to a little bit. Food has gone up a little bit.
Went up more than it should.
0.2% instead of 0.1%. First time it's happened in a long time. But now we're starting to see this circular flow. It can be flowing two different ways. It can be flowing up. In other words, when we are spending money, businesses are making more, they're hiring more. That's when the flow is good, right? That's when the economy's growing.
You don't want the arrow to go the other way.
We don't want the arrows going the other way, right? If this is a bad arrow and it's going down, it's going to make businesses go down, which is going to make jobs go down, which is going to make values of goods go down, which makes businesses. Right? This is one of the few times where when you flush and the water goes down, it's bad. You really want to flush and have the water shoot back in your face.
So then the only way that we could really restore the economy is with the government?
Exactly, and that's the government's job. The government's job is to keep track of all of these arrows, and whenever one of those arrows has a hitch in it, what should it do?
Try to fix it.
Pump money for it. And that's generally what its job is, right? Oh, I already erased it. But that's why the government's job is to take care of the macroeconomy. And literally, folks, this is why the government breaks up these GDP calculations into different factors, right? It's keeping track of all of these things. And whenever one of them has a hitch, dump money into it, right? And it works just as well for goods and services, right?
So you think our forefathers, when they created the country, said, okay, we're going to have a government that does this?
Oh, no, of course not.
No.
They didn't, not back then. But then again, they didn't have as much information available at their fingertips. They would have loved to have been able to do it back then.
If we would have started doing this then, say they would have been able to do that then, where do you think we'd be right now?
I doubt we'd be too much different,
In
really.
any different shape than we are.
Probably not much different. I mean, they did have access to a lot of this information. They just didn't tell us that they knew. But they tried. I mean, the government's been trying to do this for a long time. Again, the problem with the government is that there's 200 people getting into a room trying to decide, well, where should the money go? And one of the people is saying, well, I'm from, Boston, and Boston is having...
100 of them are saying we should put it here, and 100 of them are saying, no, put it here.
And that's why the government doesn't always do its job correctly, because where this should be in a specific area is
That's why there should have
different,
been a fourth branch to the government.
which is just the business, which is just taking care of the
Just
economy.
somebody out there saying, this is what we're going to do, folks. This is what we have to do.
As opposed to what we are doing. All right, so anyways, this circular flow model and this formula sort of dictate how the economy works, all right? And again, like I said, any arrow in there causes a problem. So imagine you're from Japan. What happened to Japan a couple of years ago?
Tsunami.
Tsunami. Did they lose value in their houses? Did the
Oh,
value of
yeah.
their houses tank?
Yes.
No, values of their houses are just the same. Now the ones that got demolished are demolished, but they collected their insurance on it, right? Because they had homeowners insurance, etc. And the value of houses in Japan are exactly the same as they were today as they were before. A little bit higher because there's a little bit less supply. But their GDP tanked. Why?
Because they couldn't export anything.
Exactly. These arrows were screwed up. Not even just the money values, it was the ability to transport goods and services, to get products from businesses to the product market. They couldn't do it. Their supply chain was broken. Because there's a big, huge lake where there used to be 2 or 3 cities, right? I mean, that was a problem. It was a problem in the supply chain. It had nothing to do with money. All it had to do with was supply. And once the supply stopped working and businesses couldn't produce goods, what happened? The flow of money, instead of going up, was going down. Same type of thing. And so what's the Japanese government trying to do? It's trying to facilitate the movement of goods, right? So that's what they were trying to spend their money on, if you will, was helping businesses transport goods or raw materials, what have you. All right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be money. It can be any piece inside of here that's causing a problem, right? And in theory, our government is watching and taking care of us. Let's not go too far down that road yet.
From space.
All right, so this formula, folks, please memorize, okay? Hopefully, you can pull it off of the circular flow model that you build and design for yourself anyways. But again, this nice little picture should keep, C plus I plus G plus X minus M in your head. And again, remember, there's a minus sign there, right? All the other numbers up there, C, I, G, and X, those are all good for our economy, right? When I tell you that exports are rising, you're going to tell me that GDP is rising. If I say that consumer spending is back on the rise, what are you guys going to say? You're going to say GDP is on the rise. If I tell you that imports are rising,
It's bad.
that's bad, you will tell me that GDP is
Falling.
falling, okay? Because you know what a minus sign means. I know that's deep math, but you guys can do it. Right? Okay. All right, so, this is what we use to measure economic growth, GDP. Is it the best way?
You're asking us. We're taking this class. We don't know.
Well, tell me what you think, now that I've given you some
Do I
insight into
think-
how it works.
Do I think that's
No,
the
there's
best
a lot of
way?
people that don't.
Logically, I think it makes the best
There's all those
sense so
exceptions
far.
to our GDP.
What else could be?
What else could we use? That's the biggest reason why we keep using it. What else is better? Unfortunately, it's attrition more than anything else that keeps us looking at GDP, because there really isn't anything else better, right? We don't, what other number can we use to measure what's going on in our economy?
You're certainly not going to use the deficit and all that.
Probably not a good idea.
No.
So how is it bad?
All the bad?
How is it bad to use GDP?
It doesn't take into account any used goods, which
Right.
a lot of people are probably going towards now that they're cheaper.
Things not included in calculation should be. Of course, it's difficult, right? Because when you make a product, it hits GDP and it's now counted once. If you resell it, should it count a second time? It's already counted once. Should it count again? I mean, think about it, right? If you bought a car in January and then sold it to somebody else in February,
Just for the crack color. Saw it a month later.
well, maybe you found a better one. Maybe you're rich and you just said, oh, well, I'll sell this one to somebody else and just buy a new one, because that's what you do. And that person, after they buy it in February, they sell it in March. And every month that car gets sold. Should the car be worth 12 times its GDP? Would that be reasonable?
It wouldn't be, but then it doesn't take into the account of
Sensibly, we're
consumer spending. that's
Yeah,
going
and
towards
it's
it.
tough, right? So some difficult calculations, right? We don't know when to count it, when not to. That's hard. Now, the other thing about GDP, I mean, all of this going to work and getting money, why do you guys go to work? To get money, but I mean, what are you going to do with the money?
Buy
Survive.
we can buy things
Buy things, yeah. When do you buy those things?
when you
when
need
you
it.
have the money.
Whenever you want.
Whenever you want, exactly. So when do you go do it? What time?
Whenever.
You have time.
When you're not working.
Well, but you should be working 24/7, right? Because that's what's helping the economy, right? So,
Well, people being dead from lack of sleep won't really help the economy.
true, but they should learn how to live without sleep, damn it.
Yeah, we don't
That's
care
a
about
good
them.
point.
Why do we go to
Heavy
work?
workers.
What's the point, right? I mean, what's the point of working? Do we work to live or live to work?
Both.
A little bit of both. So when you guys get to a Saturday or Sunday, you'd like to have a vacation, right? You'd like to not have to work on your weekend, right? I mean, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we get a 2-week vacation. Should you ever get a 2-week vacation? According to GDP?
No.
According to most businesses, no. Right? They would rather not give you any vacation. But the whole point is that we work to take vacation. And when we're on vacation, are we generating GDP?
Yes. Oh.
Well, not if we're vacationing out of the country. Unless you go to a foreign country and only buy our goods that we exported out to them. Like you only go to McDonald's when you go to another country. Which would sort of defeat the purpose. But the whole point is, how do we measure leisure/vacation? Should it be generating GDP while we're sitting around basically doing nothing? I mean, are we being productive? No. But are we generating the necessities so that we can be productive? Yes, that's why we get vacations. Otherwise, we'd be robots and work all day, every day, right? How do we measure that? Is there a way to measure it? Could we somehow say how, every hour that we don't have to work is worth, say, 1/10 of our salary because we're sitting around,
Vacation
doing nothing, right? It should, in fact, it should be worth exactly how much we do when we're working, but we don't measure it, right? Because you don't hopefully get taxed for your vacation. How do you do that? How do you measure that? Again, don't know how to do it, but there are people that are actually spending their entire graduate school career trying to figure out how to measure leisure and add it to GDP so that we can get a better picture of what our GDP really is, right? Would that be a good idea? Sure, why not? Is it something they're gonna have finished in my lifetime? Probably not. And don't forget all the other stuff, right? Right, so the things that we don't measure, black market economy, right? I mean, if you got an acre of land in the middle of your farm that you're growing something other than corn, that you're selling for perhaps a little bit more than corn.
What about these businesses that try and get around things by bartering with other?
But same thing, they're not helping the economy, but should it? Obviously it should, right?
I mean, that's
It's certainly being
that's really
productive.
black market too.
Right, it is essentially the same thing.
They're
And-
cheating the government out of taxes, basically.
Yeah.
Their intent there.
The government, in theory, doesn't really care about collecting taxes. The government cares about GDP growing, right? I mean, the reason that they have taxes is so that they can measure how much growth is and then collect a little bit on it so that they can redirect when necessary, right?
Yeah, but it helps them keep track of this.
Yeah, that's the other reason behind it. So, there are factors inside of the GDP calculation now that take this into account. They actually have correctional values for illegal activity. They will say that GDP is, say, 0.001% higher because we know that people are hiding money and not reporting it, and that the GDP should be higher than we really think it is. Again,
Like these companies that are putting their money into other countries.
hiding the assets that they have and not saying that they're using them, but they really are. Yeah, I mean, that's, again, it just points out how difficult this stuff is to work with and why it would be nice if we didn't focus so much on it. I mean,
So can we believe any of it? Sort of a fictional number, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, to some degree, you can look up the numbers that the government uses to calculate this stuff, and the amount of pages of information. Yeah, I mean, you'd have to scroll through thousands of Word document pages in order to see all the numbers they use to calculate all this stuff.
And they print that out
Yeah.
once a year, every year.
Oh, it's out there, yeah. Every month, in fact, they update it. And they'll always correct, right? Because they'll say that GM produced this many cars and this is how much they're worth, but then as the value of that car either goes up or down, they have to go back and correct and say, well, the car that they built in February or in November last year that we thought was worth 15,000 is now worth 15,500. Go correct all the numbers that we generated in February. Constantly, right? Oh God, yeah, it's hell. Okay, so anyways, GDP, it's there. We have to deal with it. It kind of sucks, but what else can we do? All right, now. Other economic numbers based on GDP. So GDP tends to be the big number that we hang over all of our heads that says this is what drives the economy. Now, I'm going to talk to you or tell you about these other numbers that that economic pundits talk about. Please don't memorize them. Don't worry about them. I just want you to have heard them once and get a little bit of an understanding of what they are, but I'm not going to ask them on any quiz or test, okay? So, some pundits will talk, instead of about GDP, they will talk about national income. And basically what national income is the GDP that we generated minus the loss of GDP over a year's worth of use. Right? So when you use a computer for an entire year, what starts happening to the computer?
It deteriorates.
It deteriorates. It starts to run a little bit slower. It's got a whole bunch of mechanical problems that start to develop. In other words, it depreciates. So a lot of economists, instead of using GDP, will say, hey, wait a second, we should really use national income to measure whether or not our economy is growing, because that takes into account depreciation. Should we not? I don't know. So other economists will talk about personal income. Personal income is how much money we have to spend. What's the largest factor of GDP? Consumer spending. This is really what we should be looking at, right? Often abbreviated PI. And again, these numbers you'll find on any government website when it starts talking about GDP. It'll say, here's what national income is, personal income is, and disposable income. It's just standard numbers that they bandy about. But it's based off of the national income, how much money we generated. It includes all of the money that we earn in income. Now, some of the things that we have to lose in our income are our Social Security payments. So we got to take those numbers out because we can't spend the stuff that the government takes out from us. So we have to take that away. In addition, we have to add any of the transfer payments that the government gave to us. Because transfer payments, remember that they're not a part of GDP. But that's money that we guys all have in our pocket, right? If you were unemployed, you didn't generate any GDP because you weren't working, but you didn't have money to spend, and that's part of your personal income, so you have to add that number back. And that's just a method of calculating your personal income. How much money is sitting in our pockets that we can spend. And then the one that you are probably more used to seeing is disposable income. This is the amount of money that we actually really can spend. And the last thing that's not up here is just straight up taxes we have to pay. We kind of combine Social Security payments and taxes together, but economists have separated them, put them into two categories. So a lot of times you will hear disposable income as a number that can be used to determine whether or not we have the ability to grow in the future, right? And just remember that it takes into account some other things than just what did we produce, right? Again, please don't memorize any of that formula stuff. I just want you to have heard these phrases so that if you hear them in an economic interview, you will know what they're talking about, at least a little bit.
So most of us go home and watch CNN.
Yeah. I mean, A lot of times on CNN, they'll start talking about